السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته جميعا، وأهلا وسهلا بكم في يوم السبت. يعني نحن نعرف بأن هذا اليوم هو يوم الأسرة والعائلة، لكن مع الكوفيد 19 صارت الأيام كلها متوازية ومتشابهة، إن كان يوم عطلة أو غير عطلة للأسف الشديد. لكن ما زال أنه هذا اليوم يوم يعتبر يوم العائلة، فأهلا وسهلا بكم. وإن شاء الله ستكون هذه المحاضرة محاضرة شيقة ومفيدة إن شاء الله بكل المقاييس. الآن هذه هي آخر محاضرة لنا في سنة 2019 و2020. إن شاء الله يعني في العام القادم ستكون هناك عدة محاضرات أخرى، لكن هذا العام سننهي هذا العام بهذه المحاضرة إن شاء الله. وطبعا من يريد الوحدات للإكستندد ليرنينج hours، الرجاء إعلامي إذا كانوا قد حضروا كل المحاضرات. طبعا لمن يعني يعمل في مدارس كاليفورنيا، these units it's going to be translated for your يعني professional development and your salary points. So إن شاء الله من يريد الرجاء البقاء معنا في النهاية بس لا يعطينا خبر، وأنا سأرسل لهم يعني المعلومات أو الأوراق التي سيوقعونها وكيفية الدفع وإلى ما شابه ذلك. أعرف الأستاذة أروى هي من المتابعات والمستمرات، لكن لكي تحصلوا على هذه الوحدات أو اليونتس يجب أن تكونوا قد حضرتم كافة المحاضرات، كل المحاضرات، وهذا ليس يعني شيئا من عندنا، وإنما يعني هذه الأشياء من متطلبات للحصول على هذا الأمر. هل يوجد شهادة؟ إن شاء الله سنرسل لكم شهادة لكل من حضر معنا، إن شاء الله سنرسل لكم هذه يعني الشهادات. هناك تسجيل إن شاء الله، لكن التسجيل من الصعوبة بمكان عرضه على موقعنا، لأن الموقع يعني الذاكرة على هذا الموقع قصيرة، ولكن إن شاء الله سنحاول بطريقة أو بأخرى لبعض من المحاضرات، ليس لكل المحاضرات. لم نقم بتسجيل كافة المحاضرات، أو هناك بعض المحاضرات التي سجلت بالصوت وليست بالصورة. على كل الأحوال إن شاء الله في العام القادم سنبدأ بمحاضرات أونلاين، وبعد ذلك ننتقل، ونرجو من الله أن نستطيع التواجد مع بعضنا البعض في المؤتمر السنوي الذي سيكون في عام 2021. إن شاء الله سيكون وجها لوجه وشخصي بشكل شخصي، ونراكم وقتها. الآن سأترك الميكروفون للأستاذة لينا لتقدم ضيفتنا الكريمة.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I know there is some questions and inquiry, Iman, you didn't maybe look at it, but if you are a new attendee, please just يعني now you are on our list, since يعني انتوا عملتوا تسجيل عنا، فهذا اللي بتحصلوا عليه، انه بتصبحوا اعضاء. لكن للاسف عندما اذا وان حصل وعملنا المؤتمر السنوي ويكون حقيقة مثل وجها لوجه، لن تستطيعوا الحضور إلا إذا كان وضعنا هناك ميزانية خاصة للسفر والإقامة. لكن وجودكم معنا أصبحتم أعضاء، وإن شاء الله ستحصلون على كل معلومات أو كل المحاضرات الجديدة وفي المستقبل. Welcome, Leslie. Leslie Grahn, we are so proud and so, excited to have you. She has 27 years of language teaching experience in middle school and high school, and currently she is a coordinator of world languages in Howard County Public School System in Maryland. And lastly, she has been a course instructor as a foreign language teaching methods and differentiated instruction, and is a frequent presenter in a state and in a regional and national conferences. We are so honored to have her. She has specialization in best practices, and she's also facilitate workshops on several topics such as student engagement like today, authentic resources, assessment, and core practices, and differentiated instruction. She has experience in teacher and leadership development, and leads actually training and instructional coaching, mentoring, leadership, and communication skills. We are so proud and honored to have you, Dr. Lesley, and we are so anxious to hear what you are going to offer, and hopefully, and I'm sure every one of us will benefit from your experience and your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with everybody today. I'm greeting you from Maryland. I live in Howard County, Maryland, which is between Baltimore and Washington. So you have an idea of where I'm coming from. So I'm 3 hours different from the West Coast. Today we're going to talk about how to create learner-centered learning environments or language environments. And really, this has been a true challenge for teachers, especially during these last several months, because we were having to try to engage learners in a whole nother setting. So many of us, all the way up through the first or second week of March, ended up suddenly pivoting to a new way of teaching. And it was very kind of stressful and anxiety filled for many of us. And so we had to figure out, like, how can I take what happens in my face-to-face class and turn it into an online environment? Now we're not even sure what our fall is going to look like, and it might be a hybrid of the two. We might be going back with some students some days, who knows? And so what I think is important is that we think about what the best practices are for creating learner-centered environments, whether that is in a face-to-face classroom or as distance learning. So I have my website there, and I'm probably going to take you there a few times to show you where some resources are. And it's granforlang.com. So if you want to take a picture of that, it's my last name, Grahn, and then for as in foreign and lang as in language.com. Also on Twitter, my Twitter handle is Gran4Lang. So if you'd like to tweet about today's webinar, please include my Twitter handle. And also on Pinterest, you can find me by looking for Gran4Lang. So as was shared, I was most recently the coordinator of world languages for Howard County Public Schools here in Maryland. I supervised about 200 language teachers pre-K-12 in 8 languages. And one of my leadership philosophies was about, I never asked teachers to do something that I couldn't show them resources, templates, and examples for. So you're going to see lots of resources, examples, and templates I'm going to share with you today, so that if you're thinking about trying something new, at least you have a starting point. You're not starting out from zero and trying to figure it out on your own. And that's why I work so hard on my website and also on my Pinterest boards. So here are our goals for today. You're going to build on your prior knowledge about learner-centered instruction. It's possible you've already attended some professional learning on this topic. We're going to explore some ways to create a supportive target language learning environment. That supportive environment is particularly key because what may happen to us in the fall is that we may meet students online, whereas in this past school year, many of us knew our students in the face-to-face classroom for most of the school year and only had to finish out the school year online. We face the possibility of not even meeting students in person. And so how can we still make sure we have that supportive environment, even though it's now an online environment and not my face-to-face environment? We want to think about what student engagement has to do with learner-centered practices and vice versa. You're going to add instructional strategies to your toolbox that are learner-centered, and you're going to reflect on your current practices and set goals for future instruction. So this is what the homepage of my website looks like, and in fact, it looks a little different from that. If you go to it, you're going to see a black bar across the top, and that's where I've put all of the materials I've created for teachers since COVID started. And so in very early March, I started generating lots and lots of resources for teachers because we were all suddenly thinking about how in the world am I going to make this happen online. And so as I said earlier, we will be visiting that site a little later. Also, this is my Pinterest board, and I have close to 200 boards at this point. I do have a separate board that's infographics for world languages in Arabic, if you're interested. And then elsewhere on my boards, you're going to find not only topical boards, like for example, school, immigration, family, food, things like that, but you're also going to find pedagogical boards, like how to do flexible grouping, how to do student choice, and things like that. So you're going to find multiple resources there, which have all been curated for you. So since we're going to spend this next couple hours together talking about learner-centered classrooms, I thought we would start out by just looking at what some of the visuals are that are out there around this idea of learner-centered classroom. So you see on this slide, I have 4 visuals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show each of them individually. While you are looking at these 4 visuals, I would like you to really grab a hold of the big ideas that are coming out to you. Either things that are repeated in the 4 visuals or something that just really stuck with you. And then after we look at these 4 together, I'm going to have you go to a Padlet page, and you're going to write down what keywords really stuck out to you when you were looking at these visuals. So let's look at this first one. This one is quite simple. It talks about learner-centered instruction having 6 attributes: collaboration, control, personalization, relevance, challenge, and engagement. And we are going to touch almost all of those attributes during our time together today. Let's take a look at the second one. The second one is a continuum, and it talks about how do I move from teacher-centered to learner-centered instruction. And so for learner-centered instruction, we're trying to be at the right-hand side of the continuum, right? And so on the left, the student is just a participant in the classroom. But as you see, as we move across the continuum, the student becomes a co-designer and a designer, and then an advocate, and then an entrepreneur. And so the idea is slowly but surely, they become more and more independent and less dependent on the teacher. So as we move towards learner-driven or learner-centered instruction, think about how that, some people call it a gradual release model. Like, how do we slowly release the energy of the learning to the students, and that we as the teachers aren't doing a lot of the work. Now this one is quite busy, but I love this one because it has great ideas. And so you'll see, I think there's 17 total ideas about things you could do to make your instruction more student-centered. So ask big questions, right? Shift the focus. So shift from what you're being made to be taught and what must be learned, and also what students are interested in. Think diversity. Offer choice. Use 21st century tools. Now, obviously, that's things like technology, which we've kind of been forced into over the last couple months. Keep it real. Use authentic resources and activities. Solicit feedback. Dig into content. So instead of just addressing content at a surface level, making sure we dig in and get the things that students are interested about a particular topic. PBL refers to project-based learning, where students do a project throughout the unit and slowly accumulate information for their project. Change roles is another one. Let kids teach. Gamify. Gamify means you're going to have kids playing games, and many of us use things like Quizlet and Kahoot and things like that. Vary your approaches. That's actually a proven differentiated instruction strategy. Active thinking, have students actively engaging and thinking about the content. Assess student interests. Teachers should seek wisdom from their peers, from their instructional coaches, from their professional learning communities, like the community you all have. 16, connect the questions with the subject being taught. So think about, okay, so now what does this have to do with your life? And be careful not to overemphasize coverage of material or prioritize grading over learning. Don't forget to explain the goals and the can-do statements, the learning targets. Don't ignore student concerns. So I love this one because it's got some great thinking points around the idea of student-centered instruction. And then here's the fourth one, and it talks about the 10 characteristics of learner-centered experiences. So starting at the top, personal, it should be personal. Agency, that's students taking charge of their own learning. Inquiry, them digging deeper and solving problems. Collaboration. Authentic. Critique and revision. This is important in a learner-centered classroom. Instead of seeing a task as something I completed and my teacher just gives me a grade on, instead I complete a task, my teacher gives me feedback on it, and I have the opportunity to make it even better. So if my teacher says, oh, this was a novice high kind of writing piece, if you'd like to make it an intermediate low, here are some things you might want to do to it, and I'll give you the opportunity to go back and do those things. That's where we really see students have growth. There should be productive struggle going on. There should be challenge for students. Students are setting goals and feel accountable. They get lots of models, and there's lots of time allowed for reflection. So when you think about those those 4 visuals, some with very little information, some very heavy on information. What I'd like you to think about right now is what ideas really stood out to you? Like what key words really spoke to you in some way or stuck with you in some way? And so what you're going to do is there's a Padlet board, and here is the URL for it. So I'll give you time to copy that. It is also in the chat. If you go all the way to the very top of the chat, it is there.
I will
Go
put
right
it.
ahead.
Yeah, I will put it again. Just, for.
Sure. And then I'd like you to go to that Padlet board and just write down the big ideas that are coming across. What key ideas stood out for you during that little segment?
All right. معلش إذا بتحبوا أو أول مرة بتستخدموا بادلت، إذا بتلاحظوا لما بتروحوا على هيدا الموقع حيكون في أسفل الصفحة في علامة زائد أو يعني إضافة، بتضغطوا عليها فبيطلع لكم مثل صفحة أو ورقة وممكن تطبعوا عليها أي شيء، فبيبقى هذا مثل اللوح في الصف واستخدامه ممتاز في الصف، في طبعا على التدريس عن بعد، فبيتيح فرصة لطلابك يستخدموا الكتابة ويكون في هناك تبادل تفاعل مع المعلم. بس لما تروح عليه اضغطوا على إشارة زائد في أسفل الورقة.
I'm seeing ideas about feedback, about giving students another chance to redo work based on feedback. Have students be more independent with their work.
Leslie, I mean, sorry, but we can't see the screen of the Padlet on the screen.
Oh,
Just, I mean, to show everyone the all the
yeah.
answers.
So let's make sure that's working.
Yeah, I see it on the side, but it's not projected.
Yep. Let's try that again. Let's share my desktop so then anything I show on my desktop.
Yeah, that's right.
There we go.
Yes.
So I see collaboration, challenge,
encouragement, assessment. Students are more dependent. Very good.
active thinking, productive challenge.
Yes, whatever you're writing, we see it immediately. So if there's someone say, if I am writing, you could see me immediately. Yes. Whatever your thoughts and your answers, it's really immediately we see that.
Having students design their own learning objectives, that's that whole setting goals. I love that. Critical thinking.
Someone wrote in Arabic that is like helps in differentiated language instruction or, you know, production actually. Too.
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure.
Would you please tell me if you saw mine, it had 3 modes of communication.
Yes.
The reason I'm asking is that I want to see if I am seeing
Yes.
or not.
So yours says collaboration, challenge, and the 3 modes of communication.
Oh, very good. I can use this with my students. Thank you.
Yes, yes. They even have a setup on this where you can set it up in columns so that you have a prompt at the top of the column and then the students just put it underneath the particular prompt. So you can have more than one on there.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Love it. Shift the design. Remember from that continuum. Keyword facilitate, keyword collaborate. Love it. So about another 30 seconds on that and then we'll go back. Problem solving, critical thinking. Awesome. Okay. We are actually going to come back to this Padlet a little later to add some additional things. Thank you to all of you who shared during this time. That was awesome. And I'm going to go back to not this. I don't know why you're not letting me go. Okay, here we go. So let's continue our background knowledge around student-centered or learner-centered teaching. So this is a neat visual that I found. So the whole idea is in a teacher-centered approach. It's very direct instruction. It's what we call old school teaching, right? Where the teacher is the formal authority. I'm the expert. I'm the personal model. I always think about the old way of teaching as we were the people with all of this knowledge and we were going to just pour it out on all the students. And in a student-centered approach or a learner-centered approach, We are looking at inquiry-based learning, so students become facilitators, models, and delegators. And there's lots of cooperation happening. Notice the word collaboration showed up a lot on those former visuals. And so there's lots of facilitation and delegation. When they work in groups, they're delegating tasks off to each other. Here's another visual that talks about teacher-centered versus learner-centered. And you can see from this one that we really want to shift the focus over to the students. Notice in row 3, it says the instructor answers students' questions, but really we want students answering each other's questions, right? Because that's where they're working on their communication skills. And then instead of the teacher always telling students where they are in their learning, students are actually evaluating their own learning, and the teacher is too. Through feedback, then the students are improving their learning. So when we think of moving toward learner-centered practices, from the types of things you see on the left, where it's very teacher-centered, it's all whole class and the teacher's just talking to all the kids at once, there's a lot of memorization and recall, there's short responses and fill in the blank, and everyone gets the same assignments. And instead, if I want to start moving towards learner-centered, I want students to actively engage. I want to use things like centers, small groups, pairs. I want to have this idea called flexible grouping happening in my classroom, where sometimes I work with a partner I choose. Sometimes I work with a partner I randomly am paired with. Sometimes I work with a partner that I get, that my teacher tells me to work with. Everything is very flexible. And for students to see that when we put them in groups, the whole idea is that they're trying out their language on as many different classmates as possible. So we're moving from memorization and recall to students actually doing something with the content. And so we want them putting the content into action. From short responses and fill in the blank to instead, we want students creating performances and products that demonstrate their ability in the target language. And instead of giving everyone the same assignment, there is some choice involved and also some tiering involved. Now, tiering refers to the ideas that you might offer a task that has multiple levels of difficulty, which we're going to talk about today. So there's a great book out by Mary Ellen Weimer called Learner-Centered Teaching, and her 5 key practices or changes are to think through your role as a teacher, to think through the balance of power that's in your classroom, to rethink what the true reason we have content is. Content in a 21st century language class is what's giving students something to talk about. And so regardless of the theme we are exploring, whether that's school or leisure time activities or health or whatever, that's just giving me words that I can now use to communicate with my friends, create presentational products. I can speak about it. I can write about it. I can read and understand about it. So the idea is it just gives me a context for my communication. We're shifting the responsibility for learning over to the students. And remember the whole idea about purpose and process of evaluation. It matters that students are self-evaluating as well. In a student-centered learning environment, there's a high degree of engagement, challenge, enthusiasm, and joy. Students understand what they're learning and why they're learning. Why is this useful to me? How is this going to help me to communicate? I want to do lots of blending of individual, team, and large group work. And students should use personalized technology to produce as well as consume. And what we mean by that is not only are they using tech to produce tasks for you, but they're also consuming information through the technology, whether that be looking at a video online, looking at an infographic. Students have opportunity to work at their own pace and explore their own interests. Students are doing the bulk of the work and the talking. That's a really interesting experiment to do, is take one class period and have someone time how much you're talking and how much students are talking. And the typical percentage is about 20% students, 80% teacher. And so our goal is to make the teacher percentage smaller and smaller and have the students doing more of the talking. There should be multiple forms of assessment, feedback, and demonstrations of learning. And instruction, culture, and environment should reflect the diversity of the students in the class. So the 5 characteristics of learner-centered teaching, again, you're going to see some of the similar, these are from different sources. Engaging students in the hard, messy work of learning. There is going to be some explicit skill instruction. Students aren't going to magically learn how to jump from going from lists of words to phrases to sentences to strings of sentences unless I've had some kind of skill building that was led by my teacher. Encourage a student to reflect on what they're learning and how they're learning it. Motivate students by giving them some control over the learning process, and encourages collaboration. And here's a nice quote that I found. What matters is not what we teach, it's what they learn. And the probability of real learning is far higher when the students have a lot to say about both the content and the process. So let's look specifically, that was all kind of the research out there on learner-centered classrooms. So now let's get more specific. What does a learner-centered language classroom look like? So the key characteristics of a teacher in a learner-centered classroom, the teacher acts as a partner in the learning process. The teacher gives learners voice and choice according to their needs, age, and ability. The teacher makes instructional decisions based on learners' performance. The teacher engages learners in cognitively challenging real-world tasks. And notice at the bottom, this comes out of Star Talk. The teacher creates multiple opportunities for learners to interpret and express ideas about topics of interest to them. The teacher provides learners opportunities to collaborate while using language to accomplish a meaningful task. The teacher allows for ongoing feedback from a variety of sources to improve learners' performance. And what they mean by variety of sources, we even teach students how to give each other feedback. If we all understand the proficiency-based rubrics, we should be able to give feedback to our friends as well. So throughout the rest of today, we're going to touch 3 categories. We're going to, which I call the ingredients for a learner-centered language classroom. So we're going to begin by talking about the supportive learning environment. Then we're going to shift to student engagement. And then our last segment's going to be about voice, choice, and challenge. Just as an FYI to you, I am planning in a short 5-minute break so you can stand up and move around or grab a drink or something like that. So I won't ask you to sit here for 3 hours. So I will hopefully get a little break in there for you. So let's start out by talking about the supportive learning environment. So regardless if you have a face-to-face class or you have a virtual class, there are certain things that do not change. So number 1, all students should feel known, seen, and heard. They should feel like you know them, you call them by name, you have an idea of the things they like, you have an idea like if they play on a team or something like that. They want to feel seen. That means they don't want to feel like that they're being overlooked in any way in the classroom, that they're seen as a part of the group, and they want to feel heard. And that means I want to make sure that the messages I'm trying to send you about me and my learning, you're actually listening to. The classroom environment, whether face-to-face or virtual, should be language rich. So that means in the face-to-face classroom, lots of language all around me. I might have expression lists in my notebook. I've got lots of access to language. In the online classroom, same thing, but just in a virtual way. Students should feel safe to take risks, whether it's in our face-to-face or our virtual classroom. If we're expecting 90 to 100% target language production from students in our language classes, as ACTFL recommends, they need to feel safe to take risks. They have to feel safe that if they make a mistake, no one is going to make fun of them. that it's a safe place to make mistakes, and making mistakes in language learning is normal. Learning experiences, whether it's face-to-face or the virtual classroom, should reflect student interests and real-world contexts. Is this something that a student really would use in the real world? So when you think about your language-rich physical environment, so think back to your physical classroom at the beginning of March, you might have had things like maps and photos and artwork and posters and word walls and student work and pictures from different countries and synonym splashes. What that means is instead of just saying pretty, there's a poster that might say beautiful, handsome, good looking, and then word clouds of words that they can access. So here's an example of a physical classroom that is language rich. So you'll see that there's a little zone in the back of the room. Every day the students sit back there with the teacher. This is in a middle school classroom, and there's lots of ways they're interacting with language. So I think what really kind of got to teachers in the spring was I had all that awesome stuff in my classroom, lots of posters on the wall, lots of expressions on the wall. Now what am I supposed to do online? So a lot of teachers during this time started using this idea. They created a virtual classroom environment. So it's using Bitmoji, which many of you I'm sure have heard of. That's where you make a little avatar of yourself, like on your phone. And it is a Google Slides extension. And so this is an example of a Spanish teacher's classroom. And you'll see that she has on the far right there, question words on the wall. There are some inspirational quotes on the wall as posters. There's some artwork on the wall. And then you'll also see that she has some links built into her classroom that are links out to Quizlet and Kahoot and things like that. So think about how you can make kind of a language-rich virtual environment for your students that you typically would have if you were able to put things up on the wall in your face-to-face classroom. Think about how we could use an idea like Padlet, which is what we used just now, to create a word wall. So if I don't have a word wall in my room anymore, how can I have a word wall that students can go to where we're slowly adding words to it that help us speak and stay in the target language? So we want to put conversational expressions in there, exclamations like me too, not me, oh no, right? We want kids to be able to fill in conversations so it sounds more natural. When we think about our classroom online, we're thinking about resources. How are students getting to their vocabulary lists? Is there a path to proficiency poster somewhere in your online classroom where students can see what it looks like to be a novice mid, a novice high, etc.? Are there rubrics there? Are there can-do statements for the unit there? I can talk about my family. I can express my opinion about the environment. Anchor charts, those are things that explain an idea to students. Graphic organizers, expression lists, self-assessments. Are students keeping a personal dictionary? Are students keeping a personal journal for your virtual class? So thinking about what resources you would want to have available to students in your virtual classroom, and they know how to easily access them. We want to make sure we're putting our expectations out there. What do I expect of students in my classroom? And again, the expectation is going to shift slightly when we get to a virtual classroom. And so these are examples of expectations that teachers might put on the wall in their classroom. What are the expectations now in a virtual setting? So here are two slide captures here of ideas for distance learning norms and expectations. They're not that much different from the face-to-face classroom, but notice that on the left, the phrase mute yourself is there. That's a very distance learning idea. You wouldn't say that in your face-to-face class. You might say something like, don't talk when someone else is talking. And so seeing that we have to kind of rethink what would the norms look like in our environment. So on the left there you see expectations or norms, and then on the right, challenge yourself to stay in the target language, set goals, have fun, ask for help when you need it. These are ideas that we need to make sure students know that those things are still there for you. Even though you're not in my physical classroom, you're still going to get support. We're still going to have fun. You're still going to be setting goals and self-assessing. Now, by the way, this resource is available on my website. If you want to download it, it's a Google slide, so you can also alter it if you like. One thing a lot of people were challenged with in the spring was that they were offering office hours to students, and teachers were reporting to me that no one was showing up. And my question was, did you explain to kids what they can do with you in office hours? And this is important. Remember, back in the face-to-face school, students knew where your room was. And so they knew they could stop by there during lunchtime, before or after school, and possibly find you to ask you a question, to just say hello to you. Now, how do they find you? And so making sure that we make a list for students of things they might do when they come visit me during office hours. And notice that the very first one is, I get to check in with my teacher on how I'm doing and feeling. If you just want to check in with me because you want to just touch base, that's okay. You do not have to only see me for something academic. And remember that whole social emotional aspect of what we want to pay attention to with our students. Also, there are some suggestions online around holding what's called informal huddles, where you just send a message out to the whole group and say, hey, some of us are going to have an informal get together at this time on this day, not required. And then the kids that want to show up, you might show a little commercial or a video clip, and just keep it really light, but it allows students to have that connection with you. Also, you might want to consider something like a buddy system, where every student in every class has a buddy from the class that they check in with every once in a while to make sure they're understanding what's going on and just checking in on making sure they're okay. And that way you're not having to do all of that. The students are being responsible for each other. This poster is actually from the book I co-wrote for ACTFL called The Keys to Strategies for Language Instruction. And we need to talk to students about what do successful language learners do. And notice that number 4 is language learners make mistakes. They're supposed to. That's how you learn. And so really helping students understand, I love number 7, good language learners persevere to understand. It says, I can figure out what's being communicated without knowing every word. So we want students to understand that this experience of learning languages is, there are certain qualities that you're going to have as a language learner. And we want you to know that this happens to everybody. Also making sure we spend time with students on how to use and decode the proficiency-based rubrics we might be using, so that they understand what the next level looks like that they're trying to work toward. We also want to talk to students about what do successful distance learners do. Students were very new to being distance learners, at least many of them, in the spring. And so we say, well, here's what we know that good distance learners do. They're organized, they manage their time well, they know how to find their resources, they get help when they need it, they think before they post. And so the idea is we want to make sure we show them, here's what's different about being a distance learner versus a face-to-face learner. Now, to be honest, if you look at this list, it applies to the face-to-face classroom as well. We want to also talk to students about netiquette and digital citizenship. How do you act in a video call, like a Zoom session? And so there's lots of these types of infographics that are out there that you can translate into the target language if you wish. But these are this kind of norming that you would do at the beginning of the school year, so that all of us are on the same page in terms of what the expectations are during the video calls. If you've never seen that website before, see at the bottom of the slide, Ditch That Textbook. That person has created so many cool infographics like this that can be used for online teaching. So you might want to capture that, take a little picture of that, or remember that for taking a look later. We also want to think about what incentives can we give students in our supportive learning environment in the virtual world. So I might allow someone as an incentive to choose what background would be behind me while I'm teaching one day. They get to choose a brain break. They get to have a virtual lunch with the teacher. They get to be the class DJ and choose a song for all of us to listen to. They get to choose the site for a virtual field trip we're going to do together. You might promise to send a positive message to their parent. One day they might get to be the teacher for part of the lesson. And then there's that whole idea of digital badging. And you know, that's all about there's like incentives within learning management systems like Zoom, like Schoology, like Canvas, depending on what platforms you're using, which are called digital badges. And you'll see here are some examples of digital badges. On the top left, you'll see that there's a teacher who actually made digital badges for each proficiency level and would check them off for students. They get a digital badge based on their achievement on a particular task. And then on the bottom right, I'm just showing from Schoology how to create a digital badge. So whatever platform you use, if that's something you're interested in and using as a type of incentive with your students, I encourage you to check that out. Now here's an area that I know lots of us are worried about for the fall. What if I don't get to physically meet my students? And so what do we know about what people who have been doing distance learning for a while say about how to build relationships with students? So number one is call them by their name. So make sure we know all the students' names and we call them by their correct name. We want to include personal connections in their learning experiences. So let's say we're talking about sports and I happen to know from conversations with a particular student that she's a swimmer. And so through our conversation, I'm going to say, and Allison, you're a swimmer, right? Tell me about that. Is that a lot of exercise, right? So making those personal connections, incorporate personal connections into their feedback. So again, use what you know about the students to just make the feedback seem more personalized. Do individual check-ins. So that's where, especially if a student isn't showing up or isn't doing their work, we send a little message to them. Oh, I miss you. I'm wondering what's going on. Can I help you? Those kind of things. And it's important for the teacher to participate in discussion threads. And so you're adding your own information or you're putting some sort of recognition in there about, oh, I love so-and-so's answer. Can anyone else build on that, right? And so the idea is you're giving them kind of that positive feedback. Some ideas of ways you can build relationships at the beginning of the school year, asking students things like, what 3 words would you use to describe yourself? And they write them in the target language. What 3 images would you use to introduce yourself? And you would assign 1 slide and a Google slide presentation to each student. Do a flip grid, getting to know you, where they put up a little mini video of themselves and tell about themselves. Share 3 photos of places that are meaningful to you. Complete a poll about things you like and things you don't like. And that can be done in something like Mentimeter, Poll Everywhere, or as simple as using a Google form. Create a Diamante poem about yourself. And I've actually linked a generator there. So that's a poem that starts out with just 1 word and then 2, and it gets longer and then it gets smaller as it ends. And so again, just a fun way for them to write down words that describe themselves. Make a word cloud of target language words that describe you using something like Tagxedo or Word It Out. Create a Twitter feed about yourself using something like Texting Story, Chat Story Maker. Create an interactive poster about yourself using something like EDU Glogster. So anything students can do for you to learn more about them so that you can connect with them through instruction. The next thing about supportive learning environment we want to think about is scaffolds and supports. So no matter what, in the 27 years I had in the classroom, any one class I taught had a huge continuum of abilities in the class. There were kids who were more reluctant and struggling. There were kids who were advanced learners, and then all the different places in between. And so the idea is that, how do I get students to persevere through a task who may feel unsure? And so I want to think about, what scaffolds and supports am I adding to my classroom? That's how students feel supported. So that might be a model, an example, a sentence frame, task-specific target language expressions. And the whole idea is it's there to support them through persevering through the task. That way, there aren't kids that just say, I can't do this, I'm just not going to do it. But instead, know that they have access to supports and scaffolds that will help them. And the whole idea of supports and scaffolds is not that they're there forever, but instead that they're there long enough for the kids to build their confidence. And what we found in our district through using scaffolds and supports, the students start using some of the phrasing from the scaffolds, like an expressions list, on their own because they've interacted with the list. And so we want to take those things away eventually, because we want they should slowly be building their confidence. In our district, for every language and level, we created something we called a communicative skill builder. And this was a list of expressions at each level and language. And the students were given them at the beginning of the school year, usually on colored cardstock or something easy to find. And they were allowed to lay that out on their desk anytime they had to spontaneously write or speak if they wanted to. They didn't have to. And that way we were sure that when students were trying to find a word to try to connect their idea in some way, they could look down and find that expression. So really, we want to make sure that scaffolds and supports are seen by the students as a tool that just makes their tasks achievable to them, so they feel like they can do it. And we're using them very selectively. They're intentional, they should be appropriate. They should involve some sort of structure or routine. In other words, they understand how they're using them. It helps students with collaboration, and then they begin to internalize the expressions. So here's a collage kind of some examples of scaffolds and supports. So on the top left is a word wall in Arabic, and that's just a list of common expressions or key vocabulary words, high frequency words. You decide what you want them to be. In the center top is something we call a picture description frame. And we made these for multiple languages in our district. And what you do is you print out that frame, and then you cut out the center, and they overlay it on a picture. And then the students use all the expressions around the outside of the mat to help them describe the picture. And again, this helps students that if I just laid a picture in front of them and I said, okay, describe that. And they're like, I don't know what to say. It's like, okay, look at the words around the outside. And again, over time, we're hoping that they're going to remember some of those. On the top right would be an expressions list I might give students when they're in a discussion and they have to express agreement with someone else. Bottom left is an example of a graphic organizer. I'm a huge believer in graphic organizers because it gives students buckets to put ideas in. So you're not just saying, take out a blank sheet of paper and take notes. Many students, especially struggling learners, will look at you and say, I don't know what to write. But if I say, write down all the people, write down all the actions, write down all the adjectives you see, or all the weather words or whatever it is, that's much more approachable, especially by a student who struggles or is reluctant. You'll see in the center there, bottom, is a speaking mat. It's a photo card kind of mat that students can use when they're describing a picture. And then on the bottom right is a poster that were in all of my teachers' classrooms, and it helps students when they're reading. So it gives them a process to think through. Do I already know that word? Does it look like another word that I know, right? and it has them go through steps, and at the end, it says, then look it up. And so they have to go through all those steps before they look up the word, and that teaches them how to persevere and use the context to figure out, oh, I see a part of a word I know there. Let me see if I can guess what that is. If you're interested in exploring more examples of tools for scaffolding and supporting learners, I have a page on my website called that, Scaffolds and Supports. And I also have a Pinterest board called Target Language Tools, Supports, and Scaffolds. All the ones you just saw that were in Arabic are on this Pinterest board. And so if you're interested in capturing them or looking for some additional ones, please feel free to take a look.
Do we want to do a stretch?
That would be great.
2 minutes?
Super. So let's do a quick, like 5 minutes.
And maybe if they have a questions that they can write them on the chat box, in the chat box.
Sure.
And then we can, yeah.
Sure, let me move my break up. Okay, please take advantage of this time to be able to stand up and stretch a little bit.
Can we see the screen about your webpage, please?
Sure.
I put it in there.
On the chat.
In the chat.
Okay, all right, thank
And
you.
I will share everything since the end. I'm trying to get all these.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
And hopefully, Leslie, we can have your PowerPoints to post it on our website, because everybody is asking about it. So then you can relax and just, understand and go along with the session. And then at the end, you'll find it online.
Okay, so I'm on the Pinterest boards right now, and I'm going to show you where those target language tools and supports are. So my boards are usually in alphabetical order, so I'm way down here for T. And then you'll see where those are here.
All right, there is one question, Leslie.
Sure.
Somebody's asking, while we see the poster, that how do you post that virtually? Well, that's what's her question.
You think about how you're going to do this. So virtually, I would put it in a resource folder. And then anytime students are working, they're reminded, don't forget where your resources are. One of the suggestions I make for teachers in the distance learning classroom is create some sort of scavenger hunt for the first week of school, where the students have to find where all the things are on the course page. So where would I find my vocabulary list? Where would I find my expressions list? Where is the word wall? Where is it, right? And so to give them some sort of introduction or orientation to where things are online.
Perfect.
Great idea.
Address this question. Yes, perfect. Yeah, I mean, it's like exactly face-to-face. You spend at least the first week getting used to your routine, the classroom routine. Where do you find this? How do you, yes, perfect. Thank you.
Exactly.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
Hi. I want to ask something for the class and the teacher that you show us when we teach virtual. Is there any app that I can make a class for them, like teachers and classroom? And
I put it in there. In the chat room, in the chat box. With the link of the for using the Google chart, and at the end I will share again. Please. It is for Google Slides and with the Bitmoji. So it is and how you create with that. And again, she's going to share with us the PowerPoints. Then you have a reference to it, so you can have the access to all the links. It's great.
People had so much fun with those. I've seen lots of really cool ones.
Yeah, thank you.
And maybe next year, inshallah, starting by end of July, August, and beginning of September, we can have one session to for everybody to teach them and to help them into putting things together step by step.
Oh, that's
if
fantastic.
you find it hard. So this is one of the ideas that we have, inshallah, for next year.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Arwa, I think Leslie addressed the Schoology website. They have, I mean, well, the question is like, how do you use the virtual, these posters in Schoology program or platform? I think you addressed that. Can you?
Yeah, so what I was sharing earlier is just that figure out how you're organizing your classroom page, your course page. And so if you want to have a folder that's marked for resources, then those things are in there. If you want to have a separate folder called posters and expressions lists, something like that, the students just have to be oriented to know where to go to find these things. Some people use Google Classroom, so you might have it be a folder in the drive. It just depends on how you've set things up. But what I've encouraged people to do is think about all the things you would have had in your physical classroom and kind of write them down on the left side of a page. And then on the right side of the page, imagine what that looks like now in the virtual world. So we used to hand kids paper. Well, we're not doing that anymore. So now how am I getting things to them like handouts that they can write on and either print out or type on, right? We have to be thinking about all these different ways. The ways that we taught before get transformed into that distance learning model.
We have a question, Iman, if you want to ask, and also Lulia, she raised her hand, so I think she want to allow to ask.
Okay.
Can you start, Lulia?
Yes, sure. First of all, thank you all for the wonderful presentation. I just have a question about us, the ones that are teaching the novice level, when we start teaching the alphabet. I just want to take your opinion. What do you suggest? Should we really like spend some quality time in teaching our students how to do handwritten in Arabic, where they can take, for example, a picture and upload it to the system and we look at their handwriting? Or should we start right away asking them to type in Arabic? And if it's typing, what tools do you suggest? Thank you.
I personally believe that you should do both. And don't forget about old school ways to do things. So I know teachers during this time who had students get something like a page protector and put a piece of paper inside, and they made their own whiteboards. And the students would draw a character on their whiteboard, and then they all had to hold them up and the teacher had to see them. So it can be very old school like that, where students now wipe that off with your Kleenex. Now let's practice doing that. Okay, hold it up and show me. And so things can still be done in that old school way. Students just have to be prepared to do it. So there's some way, because we wouldn't want them to take a separate sheet of paper every time they're putting an answer up, unless they have something like a set of index cards or something like that. Now the typing part, again, that would mean students having their computer keyboards translate over into, and I don't know whether that necessitates.
There is a keyboard. There is a
virtual keyboard. Yeah, virtual.
There are virtual, and there are stickers that they can put in their keyboard.
Yeah.
And so that would take a whole, if it's the first time students have done this, that would take a whole bunch of modeling in terms of teaching them how to do that typing wise. But for me, I think there's pluses for both, where they're actually trying the script by themselves and typing it. And so for me, think about ways that, as I said, people are doing so many creative things now that everything doesn't have to be online. It can be something as simple as them holding up for you what they created, or take a picture of it and send it to you.
Also,
most of the books,
Zoom, if you are using Zoom as a platform, it will allow you to use the whiteboard.
Yes.
And student, you will give them the permission to write on that. So they would be using, you know, especially for Arabic letters, could be right to left. So you will see how they are trying to do it. Yeah, there's the question, yeah, Iman, there is a question.
can I just comment on this too?
Sure.
It's again, remember, any books that you are using, there are some parts that you are going to just recognize by sounds and just picking and choosing, and there is some that you need to write it down. You listen and you write it down. And I think it's very important. It's for the brain. When there's something happens when you use the hands and trying to write it, it's different than just typing it. It is, the research is showing us that it's very important to stick in the mind and as a practice. So we should not neglect that because we are online. I know it is a bit challenging, but again, that they have 6 or 7 words that they can use in asynchronous way, and then they can upload it, take a picture, or like if they practice in one, then what's Leslie and Lena suggested. But with the asynchronous, that they need to practice these. And
Agreed.
everybody that they take pictures on their phone and they upload it. There are a couple of more questions, so
Sure.
so let's. Do you want to take the next one? It's this teacher is asking about the language acquisition. What would be the best way of presenting a language lesson while using direct method virtually?
So one thing I do want to point out is that some of the very first materials I created when COVID started that are on my website, you click on that black bar, it says resources for the shift to online learning. One of them is called Tips for Engaging Online Learners, and all of these have these sections in it that you're going to be interested in. So one section is how to do comprehensible input. So when you're doing comprehensible input, where you're teaching new words, what you want to do is think about what the students are doing while you're doing that. And the reason that is different in the distance learning than it was in the face-to-face is because in face-to-face, you were able to read their nonverbal cues, you were able to get closer to kids, you were able, right now, sometimes their cameras aren't even on, right? And so how do I even know if they're paying attention? So I highly recommend that students do something while you're doing input. And so I encourage people to have them fill out some sort of visual organizer, write new words into their personal dictionaries. I mean, there could be so many things, but I would make sure there was some accountability, because as the teacher, while you're doing all of this rich comprehensible input, and you may have all these beautiful pictures you found and all of this, it's possible kids are off to the side playing a video game. And so how are we keeping them engaged during that time? The other thing I've really encouraged people to do, and in fact, I just finished Thursday, a 3-day workshop I did for ACTFL on authentic resources. And one of the things I'm encouraging people to do is try very hard to not teach vocabulary by just putting a picture of a shirt up there with the word shirt and the word and a pair of pants and then the word pants. That can be really boring to kids who are sitting at home because they're like, what is this, right? And so try to have a context. And so I encourage people to find authentic resources. So for example, there's authentic resources out there about how to pack for a 2-week trip. And there's an infographic. It says, pack 5 shirts, pack 4 pairs of pants, pack this many. That gives a context to how much should I pack? I don't know. Let's look at what it says. And they're learning all the clothing words and all of that, but there's a context. I'm teaching them fruits or vegetables, and I want to have a context. I have to go to a family party. I have to take a fruit salad or a vegetable salad. What do you think I should take? What goes well together? Well, let me see what's here at the grocery store. I see some strawberries. Do you like strawberries? Does anybody here like strawberries, right? And so you try to have a context for why you're talking about this, not just this is a book, this is a pencil, this, right? Because we can totally lose students when we're doing something like that when they're from afar like this.
Right, so I think we can, we are ready.
Thank you so much. It was very beneficial. Thank you for the response.
You're
So
welcome.
please continue to have your questions, and we are gonna stop after probably another 30 minutes and get more questions, and then we move on to the next. Okay.
Awesome. Welcome back. So now we're on ingredient number 2, which is student engagement. So this is a great student engagement slide that I use a lot with people. It was developed by a person named Philip Schlechte, who wrote a book called Working on the Work. Wow. And he actually named different levels of engagement for students. So you see the top level is engagement. So that's what we're all shooting for. And that says it's high attention and high commitment. Students are paying attention and they're committed and accountable for what's going on. The very bottom of this continuum is rebellion. So that's where students aren't committed at all and they're not paying any attention. And then we have everything in between. Ritual compliance means that students are just doing it because they know they'll get something out of it, like points or whatever. Strategic compliance are students who are doing work because they want to please you in some way. So they're being strategic about it because they know that you'll give them a good grade, blah, blah, blah. What we really want students aimed at is engagement. And I will tell you that during this time of COVID, a lot of teachers were really stressed out, and we get it. It was all like all of a sudden our worlds were turned upside down. And we tended to veer towards entertainment and not engagement. And so I want us to make sure we understand what the difference is. It is not your goal as a teacher to keep them entertained for 45 minutes. The idea is that you might do something very interesting that could feel entertaining, but that's a tiny little hook that's then getting students to do something. And so make sure the students, it's called shifting the cognitive load over to the student. They should be using the language. They should not be watching you perform the language. And so that's why we want to be careful that in the online setting, we want to kind of be like we're on TV. And to just be careful because remember, this is about the kids and about the kids acquiring language. So this is just that same graphic in another setup. And so again, what we're aiming for is that engagement level. And you see it says the student associates the task with a result or product that has meaning and value for them. So I'm willing to do this because there's a reason why I'm doing this. The student will persist in the face of difficulty and will learn at high and profound levels. Okay, and so the idea is that we want the students to say, hey, I'm going to do this because I want to show the teacher how much I know, right? And so to make sure there's that engagement level. So when we talk about engagement, if you look through all of the research that's out there on student engagement, some things always come to the surface. 1, does it relate to their real life? 2, does it give them some kind of control over their learning? Now, what I mean by that is that there's some sort of creativity allowed there. There are some choices involved. So if I give students a task, I might give them a bulleted list of ideas, but they can also tell me other stuff if they want to, because my goal through the task is just to get them to communicate, right? The vocabulary just happens to be the context they're using. And so they should have some sort of control or choice. We're assigning things to them that are challenging, but achievable. Now, this is important. I feel like in the last 50 years, we've gotten really good at meeting the needs of struggling learners. We've learned what IEPs are and 504s are and how to address the needs of special needs kids. I truly feel that the students we have left behind are our advanced learners. And what I mean by that is we have learners in our classrooms who do the tasks that we ask them to do, and then they're reading a book underneath their desk. And it's because what I gave them to do was not very challenging at all. It actually was quite simple for them, even though it might be challenging to other students in the class, and they haven't had to really think much. So really paying attention to how often am I giving things to students that are really challenging their thinking. And so that's that last category. Remember, it said student choice and challenge. So I'll talk about that a little later. Does it arouse their curiosity in some way? And are they designing products that they're allowed to share with others? So the idea is they love working in groups, they love working in pairs, they love working in small groups. That has also been a challenge in the distance learning setting. I know some people have breakout rooms, some people don't. I saw that Google Meet is actually adding breakout rooms now. So I think because Zoom got so popular, I think some of the other platforms are now trying to get the same functionalities. And so we know that breaking them off into small groups helps them focus their learning a little more than feeling like they're in a big sea of, 30 some kids. Another way to look at engagement is through the acronym SCORE. So we want to make sure kids are successful, that arouses their curiosity, they're allowed to be creative or original, and relationships matter to them. And that's why that grouping is an important strategy to use with students, because what we know, if you've ever read the book Guided Instruction by Fisher and Fry, they talk about how after you go through the introductory phase and then the guided phase, so if you're familiar with the gradual release of responsibility, that's from I do, we do, and before you get to you do, there's that you both do or you all do. And the idea is right before I have you do things by yourself, I let you work with a partner. So that's that final test for a student to say to themselves, all right, let me try this out on my friend. Oh, I actually do know how to do this. Great, I'll do it by myself now, right? And so it's that little bridge between the guided and the independent. And again, these are really similar to the last one I showed you, but I also want to show an integration of communicative modes. This is key. We don't want to see the lessons we design for students as separate experiences, but instead, how can those experiences build on each other? And so if you think about an integrated performance assessment, for example, if I have students read something or listen to something, and they take some notes on a graphic organizer, then the natural next thing is now turn to a partner and talk about what you've learned from what you just did. I might also add a little expressions list on the table to help kids keep that in the target language. Then I might have that pair share with another pair. So that's going from interpretive to interpersonal. Now I might have them create some sort of presentational piece from that same piece of text. So you'll see that I hit all three modes, interpretive, impersonal, and presentational, all using one piece of text. So I don't need to see each separate activity I do as being separate tasks. We call that springboarding. So does it springboard into something else, which springboards into something else? I also refer to this as getting mileage off of something. So after they walk around the room and they ask students questions, so what? What are they doing with that information now? Now do they go back and write about what they heard their friends say? Like, what am I doing with that? So trying to think about how activities springboard into each other. So this is one of my favorite memes that are out there. I doubt that any student has ever left any of our classes saying that was an awesome worksheet, right? And so we know that just having kids doing rote activities is not engaging to them at all. So what I want you to do is take a look at the box on the left. So the box on the left is an example of a task that students are given to do. And then on the right are some qualities of student engagement. So let's take a look on the left. Students respond to comprehension questions about a text. So they have to look at an infographic or look at a short poem or look at a quote, whatever it is, and they're going to answer some comprehension questions. Now that's an individual activity where on a distance learning setting may not be a great thing to have kids do, because that's not a great way to use my live instruction time. That might be something better put for when they're doing things by themselves. But let's pretend I still want students to do this. So when you think about tasks you're having students to do, I want you to think about the green box. Now, is this a real world context? Well, we don't know, because we don't know what this authentic text is about. We would hope that it's about something real world. Let's say it's about what students can do to help the environment. So that would be real world. Do students have any kind of choice or control in this activity? No. And so how might I build in choice or control in some way into this task? Is it challenging but achievable? I don't know, because we don't know what the questions on the comprehension worksheet were. If the comprehension questions had questions that became more and more critical thinking, then yes, there was some challenge provided. If all the questions were very simple recall questions, then the answer for the third bullet is no. Are we allowing for collaboration? So again, might I turn this instead into a pair activity where students are working with a partner to interpret the text together? Is there a scaffold or support? Might I give them some sort of vocabulary list, some sort of expressions list to be able to use to talk to their partner about it? And are they integrating the modes? What are they going to do after this? So after they look at this authentic text, which is an interpretive task, which means I was receptive, right? I took in information. How am I now producing that information? So as I show you each one, that's what I want you to think about. Students are viewing a PowerPoint during which students listen to the teacher's presentation of new vocabulary. So as you think about that activity, and I gave you some tips earlier about this, instead of just having students sitting there, what kind of control do they have over what's happening? There might be some sort of organizer I'm using, which also is a scaffold and support. We don't know if this was in a real world context. We're hoping that it's challenging so that the teacher is not just asking really low level questions like yes or no, but the teacher is also pushing students up the question ladder where I'm now saying, well, why do you think they did that? Or who do you think they did it with, right? And how is it going to integrate the modes? So right now they're just looking at something. So they're just receiving it and listening and watching. Now what are they going to do with it? So each time you take a look at tasks, I want you to use this list as a thinking tool for how could I make this even more engaging. Next task, students complete a cloze activity while listening to the lyrics of a target language song. So cloze activities are where you give them the lyrics and there's words missing and they're filling in the blanks, right? So is that a real world context? Well, let's pretend that the song that I have them listening to is one about the pandemic. And so that's a real world context. So yes, that would check off that box. Is there student choice or control? We don't know because we don't know exactly what this cloze activity is. Is it challenging but achievable? Again, is there more than one version of this activity that one is more challenging than another? I don't know. Are they allowed to talk to a partner about this afterwards? There's the collaboration. What scaffolds and supports are students being given to help them? One example would be the teacher plays the first part of the song and the students fill it in, and then the teacher stops the song and checks in with everybody and says, what words did we get? That's that whole modeling and checking for understanding before you keep going. Otherwise, I have students that from the beginning didn't know what was happening and they don't understand all the way through. And then how can I integrate the modes? If they're just listening and filling in words, now what are they doing with that task? And then the last example I have is students are at a middle school level and they're asked to play the role of a waiter and a customer in a restaurant to practice their speaking skills. This is something many of us have done for many years. And my biggest question when people want to do this in the 21st century is your middle school teacher working at a restaurant? And the answer is no. And so how can I make that real world? Well, they really might help a neighbor make her grocery list, or they really might help a neighbor pick some meals online that she would have delivered to her home. And so really trying to make that real world for students instead of having them do things that a student their age really wouldn't ever do. Going through, is there choice and control? Well, it looks like they get to kind of decide what they want to say. Is it challenging but achievable? I think by leaving it open-ended, it possibly is. Are they collaborating? Yes, because it sounds like they're having a conversation with another person. Is there a scaffold or support to help them? So is there a list of expressions or sentence frames? So that would be the beginning of a sentence like, I like this, I like blank because it is blank, and then they're filling it in. And am I integrating modes here? So they're presenting it in some way or recording it. Then what are we doing with the other students' recordings? Are the other pairs listening to their friends' recordings and taking notes in some way? So how can I get more mileage or springboard off of this idea? So anytime you want to examine the engagement of a activity you're planning, think about these ideas in the green box. So one way we can definitely engage students in our online distance learning is through lesson hooks. Now, what I mean by that, it's the very first thing you do as soon as the students log on. So that's your bell ringer, your warm up, your do now, whatever you want to call it. It's the very first thing they do. So we want to make sure these are aligned to the unit theme. They are showing structures of vocabulary and context. It's interesting to students. There might be some humor involved. It might be a current event. It might be the context for them to turn and talk. It might be the context for them to do a free write, right? It depends on what you want them to do with it. But right away, remember, they just left somebody else's class and now they're coming into your class. How do you jumpstart them into your class? So I'm going to give you 10 ideas on how to start with your lesson hook. So one idea is to assign a unique opening for each day of the week. So if you meet with your students online Monday through Friday, one idea is to have a different type of activity each day. And so that way, if the students know if it's Thursday, we're going to find out about a place we can travel to use Arabic, for example. So Mondays, describe a picture or photo. Tuesdays, there's a song. Wednesdays, they're guessing a person or an item. I know a lot of people during COVID have been doing something where they get a friend of theirs to Skype in and speak in the target language. And it was a mystery person. And the students have to ask that person questions to try and figure out who they are. Thursday, it might be doing a virtual field trip to a target language country or city. And then Friday, dancing in the target language. So again, think about all the different input they're getting from that. They're getting music and dancing and places to visit, and they're asking questions about the person, and they're describing photos. Think about how you could use that idea for each day of the week. Idea 2, post a question of the day. So have a question up there, and then the students have to respond to it in some way. Are they doing that on the discussion board? Are they doing that orally for you? Like, how are they posting their answer to the question of the day? One example I give here, if you look at the second bullet, is post 6 questions. And then you can roll a virtual die, some dice. And I gave you an example of one called Make Dice Light. Whatever number comes up is the question that has to be answered next. You also can take an online spinner like Wheel Decide and put all the questions on the spinner. You click on the spinner and it spins, and wherever it stops, that's the next question. And so again, getting students to think about and use the language that they're learning. Lead students in a brainstorming activity. So use something like Poplet. I brainstormed to do like mind mapping, and that's like webbing, right? Making a web. Use a bulletin board app like Padlet and have students brainstorm, and you're capturing their ideas up there or they're adding it. Create a word cloud with all of the words like Tagzito or Word It Out. The idea is just allow kids to brainstorm. What are all the words we already know around this one topic? 4, show a meme, quote, or joke. Now, when it's the lesson hook, you don't want it to be something super deep because you don't want it to last a long time. It's just a way to get kids started, so make it short. Have students react in the target language. That could be a free speaking activity, a free writing activity. It could be a positive, encouraging message like you can do this, or you're special, or we're all different, and that's a good thing. and have students create their own meme, joke, or quote. I watched a teacher use one of these little pun type things, like it says fast food, and it's French fries that are running, one every day of the year. And the students have to interact with it in some way, like tell whether they like that or not, tell a story about it, like depending on what their level is. 5, conduct a guessing game. One is to reveal one section at a time of a picture and have the students guessing what it is, guess a mystery item or a mystery Skype, which I talked about in the first one. Do a show and tell where students are showing and telling about something that matters to them, like their favorite video game, their favorite whatever. 6, tweet or Instagram post. And the idea is that they're trying to pull out keywords, they're trying to write a summary question, summary sentence. It might be a text message exchange and they're trying to guess what they're talking about. The idea is just short pieces of text that are going to grab kids' attention. And of course, showing a tweet or post is very interesting to 21st century learners because they know real people did that. And what did they say? Oh my goodness, I can't believe I understand what they were saying. Do a survey or poll of your students, right? Use Poll Everywhere, Google Forms, Mentimeter, or do a survey to allow them to make a prediction. What do you think is going to happen today in the story? Something along those lines. 8, play an interactive game. And there are so many that people are doing now. Kahoot, Quizlet is spelled wrong there. Gimkit, Quizalize, Quizzes, Jeopardy Labs, Factile. There's so many of these out there. And the idea is that you play a quick round of a game to get everyone started, and then you get into the instruction. 9, take a brain break. So at the very beginning of class, have kids up and dancing to a target language exercise video, or a dance video, or a music video. You can imagine that whatever class they had before you, they just sat for a period of time. So as soon as they get into your classroom, the first thing they're going to do is stand up and move around. 10, take a virtual field trip. Go to a target language museum, do a flyover of a target language city using something like Google Earth. The idea is to get them excited about places where they speak the target language. So there was 10 really fast tips on how to get kids' attention and engage them from the very beginning of the class. The other thing we want to think about is how can we get kids to participate more in our classes? And this is something I heard a lot from teachers about during the distance learning. So kids aren't really participating, I can't see them, etc. So we definitely want to develop protocols and expectations for active participation. Remember back in the norms, it says we will all actively participate. It's expected that we will. That needs to be set as an expectation from the beginning. I always tell students that I can't help you become better at the language if I never hear from you, because your answers help me know what you need next. And so to be transparent about that. How will you have kids practice during live instruction? How are they participating during discussion posts? How are they participating during meetups? Think about all the different ways you will have students participate, and they're going to need models for that because it is different in the distance environment than it is in the face-to-face environment. Some of the things to think about is provide a way for students to raise their hands to speak, or some way to signify that they want to turn on their mic. Provide ways that students can assess their participation. So there's actually some sort of rubric that says, how well did you participate today? And students reflect on that. Highlight and recognize positive contributions made by students. Make sure you lift up kids who are being good participators. Use an online tool that randomizes which students are called on. So there's something called Wheel of Names where you can put everyone's name, you spin it, that's the student who has to participate next. Hand over the lead to the student. And then my last idea, keep score. You can award badges, emojis, something to give students that little positive reinforcement that they are participating. Don't forget that there's old school ways that students can participate. You can have students stand up, and if the statement you say they agree with, they step left or right, or if they stay in their chair, they lean to the left or lean to the right, right? There's different things they could do. You could have something they're holding up, right? And that's an example on the screen there. It's a pinch card where they can have this already printed out. And when you say take out your pinch card, and I'm going to ask a question and pinch beside A, B, or C and hold it up by your camera. And again, that's a great quick check for understanding. I gave you the idea of the whiteboards earlier where they make their own whiteboard with a plastic cover and a piece of paper. And fist or five is where a 5 is I totally understand, a fist is I don't understand at all, and then everything in between. There is a great infographic out there called 25 Strategies to Engage Students on Your Next Zoom Meeting. And it's one I highly recommend. Some of the cool ideas that come from there are scavenger hunts, playing I Spy, brainstorming, brain breaks, and some of those are ones I've already shared. But I love that there's already stuff out there to help us think about in what ways am I trying to engage students in the online classroom. Okay, so I'm going to pause here just because we are moving from, we're going to move into the next section of student engagement. So let me stop here for a second and see if anybody wants to ask any questions about that first half of student engagement.
So there is one question or a challenge. You've touched on it a little bit, but I don't know if you wanted to give more suggestion. It is the biggest challenge of engaging or using these activities in the target language.
Yep.
It is.
So yes, you're using them in the target language, and I actually observed and evaluated teachers here in my district, and I can't tell you how many times I wrote in people's evaluations, model. Everything has to be well modeled for students. So what I mean by that is we can't just say, here are the directions. And even if I'm using lots of gestures and pointing and all of that, I can't assume, and really the worst question I can ask kids is, do you understand? Because they're going to tell you they understand whether they do or not. So the only way you're going to know that is if you actually ask them, who can tell me what we're going to do first? Who can tell me what we're going to do second? What are we using this for, right? You're checking understanding. Also, I'm modeling. So I'm actually saying, so for example, if I was student A, I would be saying this, blah, 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 right? And so the idea is that I'm acting it out. I'm modeling it. I've got my document up on the screen and I'm filling in the things and I'm starting them off. We must get them started so that when they go off on their own, they're not sitting in the breakout rooms going, I have no idea what we're supposed to do, right? And so model, model, model. Anytime you give directions and then you send students off to do something and then you listen in and they're doing all manner of things, that is an indication it wasn't modeled heavily enough. Modeling takes time, but I always tell teachers it's worth it because students will then do the task. It's also important that you have printed directions sometimes so that when you do these activities with them, we remind ourselves, okay, remember when we do this type of activity, we always do this, and then we do this, and then we do this. So an example is when we work with partners, what are our norms? We always take turns. We always listen to our partner and capture what I heard my partner say. Right? What are the norms? What are the routines? What are the processes? We teach those processes so that later, when they do that task again, you say, remember what we said we're going to do during this? We said, here are our rules. Here are our expectations. So model, model, model is my best answer. It is not, my answer is not, oh, just give up and say it in English. But instead, model it heavily. If they are novice learners, then instead of just having words, I have little icons. So I show two faces facing each other if I want them to talk to each other. Then if they're supposed to write next, I have a little pencil with a piece of paper beside it. And I'm showing them kind of in a pictograph form with the target language, the steps they're supposed to take.
And you mentioned a short while ago, you were saying about having like these supporting statements or supporting
Sentence frames, yeah.
Yeah, these are very, very important from the beginning, and they are really helpful. So it's modeling and modeling how you use these. So you show them. And again, one of the suggestions, because of some students probably that they have you know, that they need more time to practice. So I would suggest to have something in asynchronous, like recorded, of how you do it step by step. Honestly, it would be helpful for the students to review it, to secure or to give them some chance to practice it on their own before that they are put on the spot. And you mentioned another thing is the issue of doing it with partners. Partners, again, practicing things, it's the gradual release of responsibility from modeling to modeling with the support of the students. We do, and you do give them in that before you ask them to go to you do individually. So even with these beginners, beginning, you know, like a task that Leslie, you suggested, it can be done from the beginning, doing all of these steps and then move on. And later on that it becomes part of their habits and they don't think about it, that they need all these support.
Exactly. Fantastic. So let's keep going with student engagement. And the next part of student engagement I want to talk about is parent small group work. So this actually feeds right into what we were just talking about. So again, I want you to think about having kids work in pairs and small groups, and ideally if your platform allows for this. And the idea is that they're trying out their language with different people. So they're not only talking to you to give you data that they understand and can use the content. They're trying it out on other people too. And so that's why I love this quote from Carol Ann Tomlinson, who you may know is the guru of differentiated instruction. She's well published. She's presents at the ASCD conferences all the time. She's well known. And she just says that we're continually auditioning kids in different settings to see how they can contribute in a variety of contexts, not just talking to their friends, but talking to all different people within the classroom. So when we're thinking about parent small group work, in the face-to-face room, we could typically do turn and talk. That is going to be even a challenge in the face-to-face classroom because they're going to be further apart from each other. But also in the virtual classroom, they don't have anyone sitting directly beside them because they're out there in the virtual world. So that doesn't work as well for us. In the face-to-face classroom, we might have kids moving around the class trying to find partners and to talk to them. That's not going to be as easy in the virtual classroom. And then we might have used things like grouping cards or grouping sticks and all these things, like you give students a little popsicle stick when they walk in, and then whatever color that is, that's their partner later on. Those things don't work anymore. So now how does that translate into the virtual world? So we're leveraging things like breakout rooms where students can work together in a room, whether that's a pair or small group. We can use things like collaborative documents. So remember earlier I referred to a Google Slides presentation where you assign one slide in the presentation to each group. So group one use this slide, group two use it, and they're capturing their notes and ideas on that slide. It might be a collaborative Google Doc. It might be a collaborative Google Sheet where they're filling in columns for each breakout room. You decide how you want them to do that. And then they're also giving information from their parent small group work through posting in the discussion post or the chat. So we want to think about, again, take the ideas you used in your physical classroom and now what are the tools I can use in the virtual world for the students to still work together. And if my virtual platform doesn't have breakout rooms, then I want to look at things like Flipgrid, Google Docs, Google Hangouts, Padlet, Poplet. There are other ways that students can interact. And I would just give the caveat that you have to make sure that your district permits these other digital tools, because I know many districts have rules about student privacy and students not giving their identity to the company and all those things. So please make sure it's within the parameters of your school or district. So when you think about doing pair or small group work, whether it's in person or virtual, I want you to think of 4 things. What's the task? What are the supports? What process are they going to use? And what product are they going to come up with? So if you're thinking about pairing or putting kids in groups in the virtual environment, I want you to think of these 4 things. So there should be expectations and norms. All group members should contribute. Everyone's contributions are valued. Everyone will stay on task. Somebody might be the timekeeper. Someone might be the group leader. You want to establish some set of norms on how this works. Lots of teachers telling me, I put them in the breakout rooms and I listen in and they're not doing anything. We want to make sure they understand the accountability aspects. The tasks should be concrete. What is it they're doing when they get in there? A student should set an alarm for themselves, and there should be a timekeeper that says, oh, we only have 5 minutes, we have to get moving here, right? And it should be achievable in the time allowed. We don't want to give students something so complicated that there was no possible way they could get it done in the short amount of time. Now, I'm sure what you've learned through virtual learning is it takes students a while to get to breakout rooms, and it takes them a while to come back from breakout rooms. And so we have to allow for that time as well for the changing of the settings, because otherwise that I can run out of time easily. What supports am I giving the students for doing the task in their pair or small groups? I'm giving the direction, the target language, I'm modeling it. Do they have an expression list or a graphic organizer to help them through? Is there a leader designated for each group who can kind of be in charge of keeping people on task? What's the process they're going to use? Are they using a discussion strategy? Are they using an interpersonal strategy or reading strategy? What is the process? We don't want to just send kids into groups and go, just talk about it, because they don't know what that means. And so we want to give a structure, a routine of some sort for what they're doing. And then what do they have to have by the time they're done? So what's the accountability piece? Did they take notes on something? Did they complete an organizer? Did they contribute to a collaborative document? Did they put something on a Padlet? There has to be a concrete task that each group has to create, or otherwise they don't see why they have to really push themselves in the groups. So here's an example. The task is, people all over the world have been tweeting about how social distancing has been impacting their lives. Use your graphic organizer to capture the positive and negatives of social distancing by interpreting these target language tweets. So the teacher shows an example tweet, and she does a guided activity where they interpret the tweet, they highlight whatever reading strategy they're using, and the teacher writes notes on the graphic organizer to model for them how they're going to do it. Then they go to their groups and they're going to interpret the other tweets and add the positives and negatives from the text to their individual graphic organizers. The student leader keeps all the group on track and keeps track of how much time they have left. And then the product is they're going to return to the larger group. And the teacher's going to ask for groups to share their positives and negatives. But she's going to use a strategy called numbered heads together. And that means that each kid in the group has a number. There's a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. And so the teacher's just going to randomly say, I want to hear from all the 3s. And that student who's number 3 needs to be prepared to share something. This is to keep our more aggressive, assertive participators, or the ones that are alpha, that always want to be in charge, to always be the ones talking for the groups. And so that's just a strategy so that the next time she'll say, now I want to hear from a number 1. Now I want to hear from a number 4. And so it's trying to mix it up. Then I might springboard into a jigsaw activity where groups from different groups get together and share, cross-pollinate what they found in their own groups. They might use their graphic organizer to create an infographic of some sort, of taking all the ideas they gathered and tell what the positives and negatives are. get some mileage off of that activity. Now, if they're able to go in a breakout room and you want them to do interpersonal exchanges, this is one of the hugest things I've heard from teachers in distance is I was not able to get interpersonal in. It is a huge challenge. So I just give you some ideas here. Make sure that it's modeled and the expectations are clear. Students are given a context. They understand what they're talking about. They're given a time limit. There's something they're producing when they come back, which can be as simple as recording their little interaction. The teacher is checking in on the groups in the breakout rooms. Students have a way to send a help request. So how do students get to say to you, SOS, we need your help? Do you have something built in for that so students don't just give up? A scaffold might be given to them. And then what are they doing with their interpersonal exchanges after? If there are no ways for kids to get together on your platform, might they have an interpersonal exchange with a classmate outside of class and record it? Have an interpersonal exchange with a heritage speaker and record it? Pairs of students come to office hours and perform their interpersonal exchange for you for immediate feedback. This one student can conduct an interpersonal exchange with you during office hours. Students could leave a voicemail on your Google Voice number as their performance. They could email you. That's an interpersonal writing task. They can conduct an exchange with a student via text and save the chat. So be creative about different ways. Remember, interpersonal is not just speaking. There's also writing. And think about the different ways students still might achieve exchanging ideas spontaneously with a friend without having the breakout rooms, because we don't all have that opportunity. Okay, I'm going to stop there before I go to voice, choice, and challenge. Any questions about that last segment where I talked about groupings, pairs, and small groups?
I'm waiting to see if somebody would write the questions up to now. Just a question about.
So while we're waiting, one thing is I know that things like Zoom allow you to randomly put kids in breakout. So that's one way. And again, that would be the same as handing them a stick when they walked in, right? So random grouping, there can be intentional groupings. If there's interest grouping where this group is going to talk about this sport, this group is going to talk about this sport, you have the kids go in and in front of their names on Zoom, they put a 1, a 2, or a 3, and then that shows you what breakout room they want to go into. There's different ways to approach it. You can do it by random, by choice, however you choose.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky with that. So it is, you can assign for one activity, you can assign it ahead of time for when breakout rooms, but not more than one. And what we found out, it is through experience, is actually changing the text. So for example, I have a chat, what's called, it's actually, it's a corner chats. So instead of the students that they change the corners, I use the picture that I have with that or the task. So I flip the PowerPoints to show it to them. So I give it to them. It's in different ways. There is other programs that hopefully that they can use, like Pear Deck. Pear Deck, yes. It allows you to move from one chat stations from one station to another, and so on. So there are a Padlet, again, another way that they can, instead of changing the physical, if it's not random, or you can move them around according to their group.
I love that first strategy you shared. That's actually called 4 corners, right? Mm-hmm. So you do that in a physical classroom. I love that you've adapted that to the virtual classroom. And so you just show the 4 different pictures.
Yeah, it's part of one session I will be presenting, or it's recorded for the summer summit with the NFLC.
Oh yeah, perfect. Perfect.
Yeah, so I'm going to share it with everybody, that I hope that they will see how is these activities actually adapted from face-to-face, that they see it in face-to-face, and my ways of changing it and making it suitable for online. So I will share that later on. Here, there is a teacher was asking how to deal with differentiating instruction for students with different levels of proficiency. And we, all of the Arabic language teachers, and I think it's other languages with the less commonly taught languages, where we might have students from heritage, non-heritage in your classroom. And within the classroom, we have, like you said, the range between some very, people that their language ability, it's more faster, or that they are, that they can acquire language at the different rates and different modalities in different ways. So it's, what do you have a suggestion for differentiating for students?
That's actually going to be in the next segment. So I'm going to use that as a teaser. I thought since we're at the 2-hour mark, we could also let people take a stretch, and then we'll do the last segment.
Sure.
So go ahead, and if you need to run, get a drink, or stand up and stretch a bit, and we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Great.